Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Seeking assistance and blessings by every name of Allah, the possessor of limitless mercy, the bestower of mercy. We begin our second session in these readings from Kitab al-Siyam, the chapter about fasting, and Ibn Hajar's book, Bulugh al-Maram. In this session, we're going to resume from Hadith number 533. This is on page 6 of our handout. It says here, عن سهل بن سعد رضي الله عنهما أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا يزال الناس بخير ما عجلوا الفطر. Sahal ibn Sa'd, may Allah be pleased with him, narrated that Allah's Messenger, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, said, people will continue to remain in a good state so long as they hasten to break their fast. So long as they hasten, this is the key word here, to break their fast. There is also a similar hadith that says, عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال قال الله عز وجل أحب عبادي إلي أعجلهم فطرا. This hadith, as you can see, we put a little superscript X next to its number in the English there to indicate that it is inauthentic at the level of da'if. So we said it's attributed to Abu Hurairah, may Allah be pleased with him, that he narrated that the Prophet, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, said, Allah the Almighty and Most Majestic stated, the most beloved of my worshipping servants to me are the ones who are keenest in hastening to break their fast. So the one from Sahal ibn Sa'd, that one's authentic. That hadith is authentic. And the one from Abu Hurairah, or that was attributed to him, this one is inauthentic. This here now is talking about breaking fast. Some things regarding breaking fast. We have a couple notes regarding this hadith. We'll go down to footnote 1 on page 6. It says that we understand from this hadith that it is strongly encouraged to eat something to break one's fast once it has been ascertained that the sun has set completely. It is strongly encouraged, it says. Breaking fast right after sunset is a feature that distinguishes the manner of fasting prescribed in Islam. As can be understood from an authentic narration of this hadith, it contains the addition, because the wording said that people will continue to remain in a good state so long as they hasten to break their fast, and then there comes this addition, because the Jews and Christians delay breaking fast. That is understood to mean delaying until the sky becomes dark, and Allah knows best. Furthermore, eating something to break one's fast right after sunset provides more strength and ease for the body than doing so later. Up to there, that's sort of all one general idea, and I think that should be fairly straightforward to understand. Now we have something else here, which is a different sort of idea. We said it is not prohibited to delay eating to break one's fast until later in the night. It is not prohibited to delay eating. There are ahadith about this, and the details of those ahadith are not mentioned in this book, but there are ahadith from which this can be understood. It's not prohibited to delay, but it's more virtuous to comply with this hadith that we're reading right now by eating something right after sunset. This would be the more virtuous thing to do. We just wanted to point that out because in this hadith, you'll notice that when we wrote our note, this hadith 533, we said we understand from this hadith that it is strongly encouraged. Strongly encouraged. We're not saying it's obligatory, because if it was obligatory, doing the opposite would be prohibited. So it's strongly encouraged to do what's mentioned in this hadith. In regards to part B, we said that this hadith was graded inauthentic in the copy of Bulughul Maram that we're using for these lessons. The virtue and recommendation of eating to break one's fast right after the sun sets can be understood from the previous authentic hadith, and following the instructions and recommendations found in the authentic sunnah is among the means of attaining Allah's love. We mentioned that because this hadith says that, what was the wording here? It said, the most beloved of my worshipping servants to me. So this specific virtue, some people will say, who would read a hadith like this, they might go as far as saying, well, this mentions a virtue here. If I do this, I would attain the virtue mentioned here. I would be among the most beloved of Allah's worshipping servants. However, the proper understanding is, this hadith is inauthentic according to what the scholars have said. If we want to attain Allah's love, what we have to do is do what's authentic. So we actually have something authentic. 533a is authentic. Remain in a good state so long as they hasten to break their fast. So do that. Do what's authentic. And as we said in the footnote here, we said that following the instructions and recommendations found in the authentic sunnah is among the means of attaining Allah's love. So this is something that we should keep in mind. We don't say that, well, we can use the hadith that's da'if and stuff like that. We already know that following the sunnah that's sahih is a means to attaining Allah's love. So we suffice with that, and Allah knows best. Next, hadith 534. This one says, عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم تسحروا فإن في السحور بركة. تسحروا فإن في السحور بركة. Anas ibn Malik, may Allah be pleased with him, stated, Allah's Messenger, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, said, eat at the end of the night, just before dawn, because eating at that time certainly contains blessings. Eat at the end of the night, just before dawn, because eating at that time certainly contains blessings. Before we move on, there's just a comment I want to make about something we wrote here in footnote number 1 on this page. It was about the addition to hadith 533a. In footnote number 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth line of footnote number 1 on page 6, we said the addition is because the Jews and Christians delay breaking fast. When we come across texts that have expressions like this, something we should always remember is that these are things that have come from the Prophet ﷺ, and it is very possible that the things that he may have informed us about by way of the companions, because in reality he was informing the companions about these things, it's very possible that these things may have been applicable to those who were in the vicinity of Al-Madinah, and those who may have, and maybe they were not in the vicinity of Medina, but they may have been around at that time. When you read statements like this, it does not mean, I'm saying this because we live in a society where there is every type of person here, every nationality, every religion, every denomination within specific religions. So when you read a hadith like this, it doesn't mean that every single individual you see who ascribes to one of these religions named necessarily does this, okay? Remember this. There are instances in which we find things in the Quran and things in the Sunnah, and if you go back and look in the books of tafsir and explanations of hadith, you'll find in certain places that the scholars actually point this out, and they say the Prophet ﷺ is talking to the Jews of Al-Madinah, for example. There are ayat in the Quran where it's clear, and they actually mention this explicitly. They say this is talking about the Jews of Al-Madinah, or those who are in its proximity around it. It's not talking to every single person in every era, in every location, right? So when we read these things, keep this in mind. Keep this in mind, and don't think that when you read a phrase like this, it means that every single person does this if they ascribe to one of these religions that are named. I'm mentioning this too because sometimes a person might come across a text like this, and then due to mixing with people at school, in the educational environment, in a work environment, out in public, whatever it might be, and maybe not even inquiring, but just because of mixing with people, discussing things, you find out that the person ascribes to one of these religions. And, for example, maybe they don't even fast. Maybe they don't even know what fasting is. And you think to yourself, wait a minute. I know a hadith that says the Jews and the Christians delay breaking fast. That means they have to fast. They must be fasting. And you meet a person, and the person might be a religious person, but their version or their denomination of the religion they ascribe to, it might not have this as an act of worship, for argument's sake, right? So that doesn't mean the hadith is saying something incorrect or inconsistent with reality. It doesn't mean the hadith is inconsistent with reality or incorrect. What it means is the individuals who are being referred to in a text like this are not, it's not something that's every single person in every single place and every single time, all right? And Allah knows best. I just wanted to draw that attention to that detail when we come across texts like these. And we will find discussions of these in more elaborate explanations of hadith and ayat in the Quran, books of tafsir. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sorry, I was just responding to the salam of the brother when he came in. I wasn't saying that to anyone here. Okay, we are on the notes for hadith number 534. 534, that's footnote number 3 and 4. We said here in footnote number 3 that this is, we're talking about eating at the end of the night. Eating at the end of the night. This is another feature that distinguishes the manner of fasting prescribed in Islam. So one feature we just read, what was that one feature? That was breaking fast right after sunset. Breaking fast right after sunset. Another feature is what's mentioned here. How we know that is because there's an authentic hadith in which the Prophet, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, stated, a distinction between our fasting and the fasting of those who follow prior scriptures is the meal eaten at the end of the night just before dawn. A distinction between our fasting, meaning in al-Islam, according to the Quran and authentic Sunnah, a distinction between the fasting we find in the Quran and the Sunnah and the fasting of those who follow prior scriptures is the meal eaten at the end of the night just before dawn. Now, this hadith says, eat at the end of the night just before dawn because eating at that time certainly contains blessings. It says here the blessings referred to include 1, following the Sunnah. Why? Because the hadith instructs us to do it. So if you do it, that's following the Sunnah. That's a blessing in and of itself. 2, being distinct from those who follow prior scriptures, whose laws were abrogated by Allah. That's another blessing. That we follow the laws that Allah has prescribed for us, the laws that will remain from the time that they came all the way until the end of this world. A third blessing is consuming what would provide nourishment and strength for fasting the upcoming day. Here we're being instructed to eat. We're being instructed to eat. So this is a blessing as well because we have a directive in the Sunnah that tells us, eat. And eat at that time, close to when you're going to start fasting. Another blessing, a fourth one, is beginning the upcoming day with additional energy. A fifth blessing is being able to give something in charity to any of the needy who may come asking at that time of the night. This is something that scholars mention. It's something that is mentioned in this explanation. Might not be something that we might necessarily find in our society. Maybe we do, depending on where we live. It's possible. But this is something that scholars mention too, and this is something that would be applicable in various places, but not necessarily everywhere. And Allah knows best. Is my jacket comfortable? It must be. Sleeping. All right, alhamdulillah. No, you can stay, it's all right. All right. The next hadith was, that was hadith 534. 535, again, we wrote a superscript X next to this one because this one is inauthentic as well. It says, عن سلمان بن عامر الضبي رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إذا أفطر أحدكم فليفطر على تمر فإن لم يجد فليفطر على ماء فإنه طهور. There actually is something, let's just see here quickly. All right, there's one other detail I want to point. What time is it right now? Okay, we got a little bit of time. There's a detail I'd like to mention here regarding the word suhoor. As-suhoor in hadith 534. It's the second last Arabic word. The second last word in the Arabic text of hadith 534. As-suhoor with a dhamma on the sin. We said here, eating at that time. As-suhoor is the act of eating at that time of the night. Okay? The act of eating at that time of the night. What do you call the food you eat at that time of the night? Sahur. What? Sahur. Sahur, good. As-sahuru. As-sahuru. The food you're going to eat at that time of the night, you put a fatha on the sin. It's called as-sahuru. And the act of eating the food at that time of the night is as-suhuru. All right. Similarly, there's al-wudu'u. Al-wudu'u. That's the act of us washing ourselves in that specific way. And the water that you use, or the container, if we imagine that we were making wudu out of a container, you dipping the water out, not out of a tap, that thing that contains the water that you use is called al-wadu'u. The container or the water in it that you use for wudu, that's called al-wadu'u. And the act of using it is called al-wudu'u, right? So al-wadu'u and al-wudu'u. Similarly here, as-sahuru is what you eat, is the thing. And the act of eating is called as-suhuru, all right? So the act, that one takes a dhamma. And the thing you're using for the act takes a fatha. All right. Hadith 535 says it was attributed to Salman ibn Amir al-Dabbi, may Allah be pleased with him, that he narrated that Allah's Messenger, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, said, when any of you breaks his fast, he should do so with dates. If he does not have any, he should break his fast with water, since it is purifying. He should break his fast with water, since it is purifying. We said in our note here, this hadith was graded inauthentic in the copy of Bulughul Maram we are using for these lessons. However, there is an authentic hadith about this topic. This hadith that we're talking about here it was attributed to somebody named Salman ibn Amir al-Dabbi. May Allah be pleased with him. That one is inauthentic, but we have an authentic one. It's narrated by Anas ibn Malik. May Allah be pleased with him. Anas said that Allah's Messenger, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, would break his fast with fresh dates prior to performing the Maghrib prayer. Fresh dates. Fresh dates are things in a location like the one where we are. These are not things that you would generally find. You have to understand that these are things that were around at the time, right? You're in a place where dates grow. You go and you get it from the tree, right? I mean, well, most of us here too, maybe we don't know what it is to pick things off of trees, right? When you want to pick a fruit, the closest you come, generally speaking, is you got to go to the shop and you pick it from whatever's there. But in the environment, you have to understand, in Al-Medina, I'm mentioning this because a person might read this and say, oh, you know what? Let me go see if I can get me some fresh dates, right? I want to follow the sunnah. Alhamdulillah, you know, if you're in a place where that's easy to do, that's good. Me right now, you know, I'm coming back to Toronto right now, after an absence of approximately 18 years. And I'm still kind of coming to terms with how much things around me cost right now. It's really, you know what I mean? It's really a big difference. Big difference. So in light of that, you know, fresh dates are not things that you can grow here. They have to come from somewhere. And then also, we also have contemporary issues given our location, which are definitely things we have to keep in mind, because even if you could get some fresh dates here for argument's sake, the ones that you might be getting, where might they be grown? They might be grown in the States. Yeah, right? And, you know, I mean, I don't need to say anything, but just there are things going on right now for those of us living here and stuff like that. I'm sure everybody's aware of those things. So, you know what I mean? There comes to you wanting to do that. And at the same time, there are those issues that come up too. So these are things that have to be taken into account. Remember that this hadith here, Allah's Messenger, and it's a saying, Allah's Messenger, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant protection, would break his fast with fresh dates. Where were they? In Medina. Where are you getting the fresh dates from? The trees. You know what I mean? It's not putting you through an expense. It's not putting you through hardship. It's not, you get the idea, right? And there are no other considerations you have to think. They're coming from another place, people who might not be amicable towards you, people who might be trying to harm you. There's none of that stuff involved, right? So these are things you have to keep in mind too when you see a hadith like this. So that was number one, fresh dates. If there were none, he would have dried dates. He would have dried dates. These are the ones that I think we probably find more commonly. If there were none, he would drink some mouthfuls of water. If there were none, he would drink some mouthfuls of water. We said here, some of the scholars have mentioned that having something sweet on an empty stomach. So before that note, we are mentioning this authentic hadith because the one mentioned here in Bulughh al-Maram is not authentic. It mentions dates and then water. So this hadith on its own is not authentic, the one from Salman ibn Amr al-Dabbi, but its meaning and the idea, it's kind of similar to what's mentioned in an authentic hadith. So we want to think about this authentic hadith that's related to that meaning. If we want to talk about the practice of the Prophet ﷺ, fresh dates first, if you can. If none, dried dates. If none, water. In that order, and Allah knows best. Now we said here that some of the scholars have mentioned that having something sweet on an empty stomach makes the body more accepting to what is eaten afterwards and assists the body in benefiting from it, meaning from what's eaten afterwards. Furthermore, if water is consumed first when breaking one's fast, if water is consumed first when breaking one's fast, that assists the body in benefiting from the food that will be ingested after it, and Allah knows best. This is in addition to the merits that dates and water have, as understood from authentic ahadith that mention their merits and virtues. So these are some of the things that the scholars have mentioned in their explanations regarding this hadith and regarding eating dates to break fast and eating things that are sweet in general, as well as drinking water. And Allah knows best. Hadith number 536. This one says, عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال نهى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الوصال فقال رجل من المسلمين فإنك يا رسول الله تواصل قال وأيكم مثلي إني أبيت يطعمني ربي ويسقيني. So I'm just going to point this out here. See if we were going to read the hadith the way you're supposed to read it. What will we do here after the word yasqini? Right, you're going to say qala here because Abu Hurairah is going to be talking. فَلَمَّا أَبَوْا أَنْ يَنْتَهُوا عَنِ الْوِصَالِ وَاصَلَ بِهِمْ يَوْمًا ثُمَّ يَوْمًا ثُمَّ رَأَوُا الْهِلَالَ فَقَالُوا لَوْ تَأَخَّرَ الْهِلَالُ لَزِدْتُكُمْ. Again here, if we're going to read the real way, we're going to say qala here as well. كالمنكر لهم حين أبوا أن ينتهوا. Abu Hurairah, may Allah be pleased with him, said, Allah's Messenger, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, instructed the people to refrain from wisal. Wisal means fasting consecutive days while deliberately not eating anything in between. Fasting one day, then the next day, and you deliberately, it's not, you didn't have food, you ended up being really busy somehow, something happened, you fell asleep, whatever it might be, it's not that. It's you deliberately don't eat. This is your intention. I'm not going to eat. I fasted today, and I'm not going to eat, and I'm going to fast tomorrow. That's the idea behind it we saw. So it says here, a man among the Muslims said, but Messenger of Allah, you fast consecutive days while deliberately not eating anything in between. You do that practice of wisal too. He replied, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which one of you is the same as me in that regard? Then he explains, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, during the night, my Lord certainly provides me with food and drink. Now, Abu Hurairah, however, due to some of the people still refusing to refrain from wisal, he, meaning the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, fasted while deliberately not eating for one full day, and he let those people do as he did. That also happened for another full day. And then, the day after, they saw the new moon marking the beginning of the following month. He then told them, had the new moon been delayed, I would have let you do as I did for even more days. Then Abu Hurairah says that was in order to reprimand them for refusing to refrain from wisal after he instructed them to refrain. Okay, this hadith now is dealing with this issue called al-wisal. So here we have some notes for the statement that says, which one of you is the same as me in that regard? Which of you is the same as me in that regard? This is on page 7. We said here that some of the scholars, footnote number 3, have explained this to mean that Allah still gave him the strength of someone who had eaten and drank, although he had not done so. Right? The Prophet ﷺ, he is fasting. He didn't eat and drink. So, which one of you is the same as me? Or who among you? Sorry, how did we word it? We said, yeah, which one of you is the same as me in that regard? Which one of you is the same as me? Some of the scholars, they say that Allah still gave him that strength as though he had eaten and drank. Even though he hadn't done so in reality, Allah still gave him that strength. This is one way some scholars understand this. Some scholars also explain that this was because of the comfort and enjoyment that Allah enabled him to find in worship, drawing near to Allah and yearning for Him, such that those things provided the body of the Prophet ﷺ with nourishment that temporarily sufficed it from needing food and drink. These are two ways scholars understand this expression. There are some other explanations that some may have mentioned as well, but these are two that are applicable, or the ones we think might be the most applicable and most plausible understandings, and Allah knows best. So either Allah gave him the strength of someone who had eaten and someone who had drank, even though he didn't do that in a real physical sense, or it's that it was as though he got nourishment by way of his worship of Allah and his drawing near to Allah and his yearning for Allah. These are things that provide his body with nourishment. Those would be nourishment for the soul, if you want to put it that way. And that sufficed him from needing food and drink for that time. These are two ways the scholars have understood that expression. So it says afterwards, during the night, my Lord certainly provides me with food and drink. During the night, my Lord certainly provides me with food and drink. We said here that, I'm sorry, hold on one second. I missed a note. Sorry. Footnote number 2. Which one is you is the same? I'm sorry, what I just read was the next one. I got mixed up just now. Which one of you is the same as me in that regard? In other words, this is footnote number 2, my mistake. Footnote number 2, which of you is the same as me? In other words, the Prophet ﷺ is telling them, I am not the same as you. That's what he means by this question. Or another understanding is, which one of you is the same as me in terms of the level that I have with my Lord, with Allah? So it could be understood from this that the practice of wisal, as described, meaning that you fast consecutive days while deliberately not eating anything in between, was permitted specifically for Allah's Messenger and no one else. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection. Right? This is how scholars have understood this expression. Which of you is the same as me? Meaning, I'm not the same as you. In other words, it was permitted for me, but it was not permitted for you. This is why I'm telling you, don't do it. Or another expression, another understanding is, which of you is the same as me in terms of the level I have with Allah? I have a level with Allah such that He would allow certain things for me. What do they call those things in Arabic? Things that are specific to the Prophet ﷺ. There's a word they use for this in Arabic. Some of the scholars, they have books about this. The word is khasa'is. That's right. They call them al-khasa'isu. Features that are specific, or things that are specific to the Prophet ﷺ and to the exclusion of his ummah. Things that his ummah is not supposed to follow his example regarding. All right. Okay, now, the note that I already finished reading was regarding this phrase that says, during the night, my Lord certainly provides me with food and drink. So basically, it could be understood to mean nourishment that is physical. It could also be understood to mean nourishment that is for his soul. And that nourishment of his soul basically made him not require physical nourishment for that time. And Allah knows best. These are the two basic understandings that we mentioned. Now, it says next, however, Abu Hurairah said, due to some of the people still refusing to refrain. Scholars have pointed something out here because it's very important for us to understand that the companions, they complied with the instruction of the Prophet ﷺ. We'll pause here for a couple minutes.
Yeah, just for the adhan.
Okay. All right. You need to use this mic?
No,
okay.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Hayya ala as-salah. Hayya ala as-salah. Hayya ala al-falah. Hayya ala al-falah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah.
In addition to the hadith that we know to mention du'as that we say after the adhan, there's also a hadith that tells us that between the adhan and the aqama, what's one of the virtues of that time? Yeah. But right now, we are sitting in a gathering in which we are discussing knowledge of Islam and knowledge of the Sunnah. And dua, what does dua mean? Or how many, do you guys have ever heard of a distinction or categorization of dua? There's the dua that we know where we actually supplicate Allah and ask Him for things without verbally. But is there another type of dua you've ever heard of? Has anyone ever heard of a dua in which you worship Allah. When you perform an act of worship to Allah, what are you really doing when you perform an act of worship? When you pray, what do you have within you?
You're hoping from Him. You're hoping from Him.
You're hoping Allah is going to accept it. It's like if you're saying, oh Allah, I know that you have told me and instructed me I'm supposed to do such and such, and I'm doing it, hoping that, and imploring you and beseeching you to accept it from me, right? So, inshallah, we make our intention in a situation like this. Maybe somebody might want to say it's between adhan and iqamah. I want to make dua. So right now, I'll say that right in this situation right now, between adhan and iqamah, we're going to continue our lesson discussing the sunnah. And we pray to Allah to accept this from us. This is a dua, what they call dua al-ibadah. The other type is dua al-mas'ala, where you say to Allah, you request things of Allah. Us now continue our lesson for these few minutes. We're doing this with the intention of hoping and imploring Allah and hoping from Him that He accepts this from us as we engage and continue to learn about the sunnah of His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All right, we were on the portion of the hadith that says, refusing to refrain from wisal. Good. Here, Abu Hurairah, he's obviously talking about people who were Muslim. They're Muslim because they're fasting with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So these people, they're all companions. They have to be companions. They're not other people. But here we find the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam telling them refrain. And Abu Hurairah is telling us some of the people, they still refuse to refrain. So, does that mean they are objecting? Does that mean they're being stubborn? It doesn't mean that here. And this is not how we should understand an action of the companions that is of this nature. So in footnote number 4, we wrote here that they, meaning the companions who refused to refrain, they may have thought that his instruction to refrain was given out of his concern for them and not wanting things to be difficult for them, right? This is the way we should understand. This is the way that we should understand an action like this on the part of the companions in this type of context. The Prophet ﷺ tells them refrain, but they see him doing it, they want to do it too, so they continue doing it along with him. There's not refusal meaning that they object or they want to rebel. Rather, they might have thought he was just saying that to us because he feels that we're putting ourselves through a bit of hardship and he doesn't want that for us unnecessarily. He's telling us refrain. It's better for you. So we say this would be the understanding here that the scholars have mentioned. Thus, they did not think that he was completely forbidding them. If they understood it that way, that the Prophet ﷺ is telling them, don't do this at all, they would have been the first of people to stay far away from it. But they would not have understood it that way in a situation like this, and Allah knows best. So then we said what we said here. Then it says that he told them, had the new moon been delayed, I would have let you do as I did for even more days. I would have let you do as I did for even more days. We said here, in other words, he would have continued until they became unable to bear it any longer. He would have continued fasting that way. We saw, fast this day, don't eat. Still, don't eat during the night. Fast the next day, don't eat during the night. Fast the next day, don't eat during the night. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that who among you is like me? Which one of you is like me? Allah provides him with nourishment throughout the night. This is not the case for the others. So he would have continued until they became unable to bear it any longer, while he ﷺ would have been able. And Allah knows best. So Abu Hurairah commented at the end of the hadith, he said that had the moon been delayed, I would have let you do as I did for even more days. I would have continued and I would let you continue, and you see what's going to happen. Abu Hurairah said that was in order to reprimand them for refusing to refrain from wisal after he instructed them to refrain. We said here that the majority of scholars hold that the practice of wisal, as mentioned, is impermissible based on the prohibition mentioned in this hadith. The practice of wisal as mentioned. Why we're pointing this out is because there are other ahadith that are not discussed in Bulugh al-Maram, which could convey the understanding that it's okay to there's a type of wisal, if you want to call it that, but it's not this. It is basically delaying the meal that you eat until the night time, until late at night, before Fajr basically. So you do eat something during the night, but you didn't eat it right after Fajr. You're going to eat right after Maghrib, You're going to eat it before Fajr. In some situations, the word wisal is used to refer to that. But this hadith is not talking about that. This is talking about what we said. You fast a day, and then you don't eat at all throughout the night. And then you fast the next day too. Right? That's what this is talking about. So that's why we said the majority of scholars hold that the practice of wisal as mentioned in this hadith, this one is impermissible. This one is impermissible, based on the prohibition. All right. Time's it here? We still got a few minutes? Okay. Next hadith, 537. وَعَنْهُ, who's the previous sahabi? We said that it was Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu. قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من لم يدع قول الزور والعمل به والجهل فليس لله حاجة في أن يدع طعامه وشرابه. Abu Hurairah, may Allah be pleased with him, said, Allah's Messenger, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant protection, stated, if a person does not forsake saying what is false, doing what is prohibited, and behaving in an insolent manner, Allah does not require him to forsake his food and drink. If a person does not forsake saying what is false, doing what is prohibited, and behaving in an insolent manner, Allah does not require him to forsake his food and drink. What does that mean? We said here in footnote number 2, this means that the things mentioned are sins. That's one thing it means. And committing them decreases the reward attained from fasting. It doesn't mean it nullifies your fast. It means these. This is how the scholars explain this. They're sins. And doing any of those decreases the reward attained from fasting. They are to be avoided at all times. Even if you're not fasting, these are things you must always avoid. And a person fasting should be even more careful to avoid them. This hadith does not mean that a person who commits those sins does not need to fast. Rather, it conveys a warning against committing those sins. Some scholars have also explained the hadith to mean that Allah would not give consideration to a person's fasting if he commits such sins while fasting. And Allah knows best. Allah wouldn't give consideration to a person's fasting if he commits such sins. Some scholars hold this view, not all. The rationale they mention is that fasting requires a person to forsake certain things that are permissible under normal circumstances, in addition to forsaking the things that are prohibited under all circumstances, right? Sins, these are prohibited under all circumstances. If you're fasting, you got to avoid them. If you're not fasting, you still got to avoid them. But when you're fasting, there are things you have to avoid that would be permissible otherwise. Food is permissible. Normal food that we would eat that conforms to the directives of Islam is permissible. But while fasting, you have to refrain from it. So it's saying the rationale these scholars mention is that fasting requires a person to forsake certain things that are permissible under normal circumstances, in addition to forsaking the things that are prohibited under all circumstances. Therefore, a person seriously detracts from his fasting if he forsakes things that are generally permissible, things like food and drink, yet still commits sins like the ones mentioned, which are always impermissible, whether fasting or not. This is the rationale some of the scholars give for holding that view, that Allah would not give consideration to a person's fasting if he commits these types of sins. The last hadith we're going to cover in this session is going to be number 538. It's 2 parts. عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقبل وهو صائم ويباشر وهو صائم ولكنه أملككم لإربه. Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, said, Allah's Messenger, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant protection, would kiss while he was fasting, and he would embrace while he was fasting. However, among all of you, he was the one who had most control of his desire. Another narration of this hadith contains the wording, fi Ramadana, during Ramadan. So we said here that, in the comments for this hadith, it can be understood from this hadith that it is permissible for spouses who are fasting to do such things, provided that those acts do not end up resulting in further forms of intimacy that are not permitted while fasting. This is the condition under which these things will be permissible. Therefore, if either of the spouses lacks that sort of control, and there is a reasonable possibility that a kiss or embrace may lead one or both of them to end up being intimate in a way that is impermissible while fasting, those acts should be avoided until the hours of fasting are over. It should also be noted that Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, might not have been fasting when what she mentioned took place, since she stated that Allah's Messenger, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, did them while he was fasting. Right? The hadith says, it says that he would do these things while he was fasting. Right? So this does not necessarily mean that she was fasting as well, and Allah knows best. The last thing is that sentence that says during Ramadan. We said that this addition clarifies that the aforementioned took place during fasting that was obligatory. He did that during Ramadan, so that means it's permissible under the conditions that were mentioned. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. We'll just do a few minutes, or maybe several minutes, if a little bit more than a few. We'll do our review and discussion, and then we'll take a bit of a short break. You can finish off what you didn't finish eating yet. And then we'll have our last session, which will be session number 3 for today, inshallah. We hope to finish that one before Maghrib time. Okay, number 1. We're on page number 9 of the handout. Page number 9 of the handout. For those who need an electronic copy of the handout, the short link for it was tiny.cc/bmfast. tiny.cc/bmfast. We're on page 9 for the discussion and review for hadith number 533 to 538. All right. Number 1. What does hastening to break one's fast refer to as mentioned in 533a? What does hastening to break one's fast mean? Anybody remember? Remember, we said our discussion and review is always open book policy. You don't have to do it from memory. Feel free to go back and look. Hastening to break fast means what? Say again?
Eating food or drinking water as soon as the sun sets completely without the rain.
Right. So the key thing there was as soon or right after the sun sets. Right after the sun sets. And when we say the sun sets, what are we talking about? Which part of the sun are we talking about? Because you know the sun is a circle. Let me use this. The sun is a circle, and we're looking at it. Let's say that you have. I'm not doing this I'm just using this because it's circular. I'm not doing this as an endorsement. And I'm not doing this because it has a Canadian flag on it either. This is the disk of the sun right here, okay? And this is the horizon. So if the sun starts going like this, is it set?
No.
So we're not talking about the bottom. We're talking about what? The top. Okay, the top. So sunset means this here is not sunset. This is not sunset. The sun has begun to set, but this is not sunset. Sunset is this. You can't see the disk anymore above the horizon. That would be sunset. Okay? So when we say hastening, we're talking about breaking fast right after the sun sets. After the sun sets, meaning not after it begins to set, after it has completely set. The whole disk has gone below the horizon. That's when you can eat, and hastening to break fast means eating at that time.
So the sun will disappear from the vision, the sun disk.
Right.
But maybe there is still some light in the sky.
Right.
Because
Right, exactly. So the brother's pointing out that even though the sun goes down and you can't see the disk anymore, there's still going to be light in the sky,
yes.
right? We're not talking about the light, we're talking about
Sun.
the sun. Good. Jazakallahu khair. All right, number 2. We said here part of the answer is not in the lesson. What was mentioned about hastening to break one's fast in the context of the teachings of Islam and the teachings of certain other religions? And when might what was mentioned apply to teachings of those other religions? What was mentioned about hastening to break one's fast in the context of Islam?
It's contrary to the Jews and the Christians.
Good. It's contrary to the Jews and the Christians, their practices. That's what was mentioned here. Now, when might what was mentioned apply to the teachings of those other religions?
It's only within the vicinity of Medina or something. Because it doesn't apply to every single denomination.
Right. This is the basic idea. Did somebody else want to say something? Okay. Right. So the brother's mentioning that. This is talking about, or an understanding we should keep in mind is, this might be those who were in the vicinity of Al-Medina during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and these might have had reasons why he was addressing those specific things, because this is what the people knew from around them. We might not have the same environment or the same people around us now who might ascribe to those religious teachings. This is something to keep in mind. Question number 3, is it prohibited for a person who fasted to delay eating until some point into the night? Question is it prohibited? No, it's not prohibited. You could. It wouldn't be. Prohibited means if you do something prohibited, what happens? What have you incurred? A sin. Good. So basically we're asking, is it sinful for a person who fasted to delay eating into the night? No, it's not sinful. If a person does it, it would not be a sin. Number 4, what was mentioned about why it would be more virtuous to hasten to eat something in order to break one's fast? Why would it be more virtuous? There was a detail we pointed out here. Anyone remember? Give me a second. There's someone over here. I'll get back to you. Okay, the hadith, the wording of the hadith was? Right. People will continue to remain in a good state so long as they hasten to break their fast. What was the other comment over here?
Those will be beloved amongst Allah's, but that hadith is weak.
Right. So what did we say? The brother's pointing out that being among Allah's most beloved servants. We said the hadith that mentions that, though, is not authentic. But what did we say? We said if a person does what this authentic hadith says, with the intention that I know this is from the authentic sunnah, that act in and of itself is something that you use as an act of worship to draw nearer to Allah. Right? And how do we know that? How do we know that? There's a very important hadith that teaches us that. The Prophet, it's called the hadith am I interfering with something here? Hadith al-Wali. Anybody know that hadith? There's a portion of the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah said. Does anybody know about what?
Say the first words that make up.
It's the hadith that begins Man aada li waliyan, but it's the part I'm looking for is into the hadith a little bit. It says وَمَا تَقَرَّبَ إِلَيَّ عَبْدِي بِشَيْءٍ. Right. Allah said that there is nothing that my servant can do to draw nearer to me, nothing more beloved to me that he can use to draw nearer to me than the things I've made obligatory. So an example of that is fasting Ramadan. Allah made obligatory. It's a pillar of Islam. And then Allah also said, وَلَا يَزَالُ عَبْدِي. Right. My servant continues drawing near to me by way of the supererogatory things, the things that are optional. Where do we know what's optional? The Kitab and the Sunnah, obviously. So he continues drawing near to me by way of those things. This is an example of that. Right? Hastening to break your fast is not wajib. It's not wajib. Fasting Ramadan is wajib. But here's an aspect of the sunnah, it's not wajib. It's one of those nawafil. This is something that, if you do that, keeping that hadith in mind, that I'm doing this thing, it's something optional for me, it's supererogatory, but I'm doing it, it's part of the sunnah, and I'm hoping that Allah will accept this from me. I'm doing this to draw nearer to Him. This is something that, by which we can attain love from Allah. Love from Allah. My servant continues drawing near to me by way of the optional acts of worship until I love him until حتى أحبه. And then the hadith continues. So this is where we understand this from, that doing what the sunnah tells us, this is something by which we attain Allah's love, right? Next was number 3, number 4, number 5. What are some of the blessings referred to in Hadith 534 that can come about from eating a meal just before dawn? We mentioned a few things.
So the first one was following the sunnah
Following the sunnah, good.
and being distinct from prior scripture, the followers of prior scriptures.
Good. Can you just pause for a second for anyone who wants to know as well, anyone who would like to follow? You can find us at the bottom of page 6 for anyone who's following along. At the bottom of page 6. Continue, please.
So the third is consuming what would provide nourishment for fasting for the upcoming day.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth is beginning the upcoming day with additional energy.
Mm-hmm.
And fifth was being able to give charity to the needy.
Good. Jazakumullahu khairan. All right. Next, we said here number 6, answer not in lesson, meaning it's not in the handout. We mentioned it. It's not in the handout though. In the text presented for 534, we chose to write the pronunciation of one of the words as as-suhuru, as-suhuru, which refers to the act of eating a meal at the end of the night just before dawn. The act of eating, the act of eating. That's as-suhuru. If we use the pronunciation as-sahuru, what would that refer to? What you're eating. Good. What you're eating. Number 7, part of the answer is not in the lesson. I mean, it's not in the handout. What was alluded to regarding eating a meal just before dawn in the context of the teachings of Islam and the teachings of certain other religions? And when might what was alluded to apply to teachings of those other religions? This is similar to what we already asked. So the main idea here is what was alluded to regarding eating a meal just before dawn. Anyone? Okay, I'm going to have to forego that one and go over here because he put his hand up.
The Prophet ﷺ said that the difference between our fasting and the fasting of the followers of other scriptures is the meal of the Prophet.
Right. So the brother is mentioning, Jazahullahu khairan, that this is one of the things that distinguishes the fasting prescribed in Islam from the fasting that was prescribed and for people of prior scriptures. Good. So that was something which distinguishes our fasting from theirs. And we said when might what was alluded to apply to teachings of those other religions. As the brother mentioned earlier, one of the things we can understand is in the context of those who might have been around at that time, in the proximity of Medina, and so on. Not necessarily every single individual who ascribes to those religions. Number 8, part of the answer here also is not in the lesson. What is an authentic hadith pertaining to things that the Prophet used for breaking his fast, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, an authentic hadith? And why might those things have been used? And we said, hint, think about when fasting was prescribed as an obligation. So part 1 of this question, what's an authentic hadith that tells us about what was used?
Hadith of Anas where the Prophet ﷺ broke his fast with fresh dates and he didn't have anything dry dates and he didn't have anything melted.
Good. Jazakallahu khairan. So we have a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ would break his fast with fresh dates if available. If not, then dry dates if available. And if not, then water. This hadith was authentic. Now we said, why might those things have been used? Think about when fasting was prescribed. When was fasting prescribed? 2nd year after Hijrah. Where were they? In Medina, because that's where they made Hijrah. So as we discussed, why might those things have been used?
Because if it's something sweet, it can be easier to eat stuff off.
Possibly, but that's not what we're looking for here though. What are we looking for here? Availability, right? It's what's around in plenty. They have dates on the trees, you have wells with water. That's what you use, right? And if the Prophet ﷺ uses it, then that makes it more virtuous. But like we said, as the brother mentioned, the availability. That's why those things might have been used, and Allah knows best. Because they're available. It doesn't mean a person has to put themselves through hardship in order to acquire them to break fast. Number 9, what does al-wisal refer to as mentioned in Hadith 536?
Fasting consecutive days without eating.
Fasting consecutive days without eating anything in between. Good. That's wisal in this hadith. But like we said, there's another understanding of wisal which Ibn Hajar did not talk about in these ahadith, or he didn't mention ahadith that deal with that meaning. But wisal as mentioned in this hadith is what the brother mentioned right there. You fast consecutive days without eating anything in between whatsoever. Number 10, what understanding was presented for the expression in 536 that says, Inni abitu yut'imuni rabbi wa yasqini. During the night, my Lord certainly provides me with food and drink. Try to mention two ideas. Anyone?
So the first one is either Allah gave him the strength of someone who had eaten.
Good.
And the second is Allah enabled because of his worship and nearness to Allah.
Right. And the nourishment of the first type would have likely been nourishment that was a physical type. And the nourishment of the second one would have been something spiritual, something for his soul. And when he had that, it might have enriched him to the point that he didn't need to eat anything. Good. Next, we have number 11. What was mentioned about why some of the companions insisted on practicing wisal along with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? May Allah mention it with commendation and grant protection. Why might they have done that?
They felt that the Prophet was refraining them from doing it out of concern for them.
Right. Maybe it was out of his concern. He didn't want them to be doing anything by way of which they found difficulty. That would have been the understanding that we want to view their action in light of. Next, we were on what, number 12? Number 12. Answer not in lesson. What new moon is referred to in Hadith 536 by the expression لو تأخر الهلال لزدتكم? Had the new moon been delayed, I would have fasted in this way for even more days with you. This one's not in the lesson, but I gave a hint here. If anyone, does anyone know what new moon that was referring to?
Shawwal.
Yeah, it's Shawwal. If you look at the hadith in Sahih Muslim under the number I mentioned, it clarifies that what happened. It happened during Ramadan. It wasn't just any month of optional fasting. It was actually during Ramadan, and they were fasting the wajib fast. It's a pillar of Islam in that way. And the Prophet ﷺ told them this towards the end of the month, and they didn't listen to him. This is another element as well here, which should let us give us a little bit of perspective as to why we also want to understand their action in the light that we mentioned. It wasn't rebellion or stubbornness. It's because they thought maybe he was telling them to do something would make life easier for them. Because the fasting they were fasting, the type of fasting, it was what? It was Ramadan. It's a rukn, it's a pillar of Islam, right? So this is why they might have thought that maybe he's just telling us to let us take it easy on ourselves, and we want to, yarhamukallah, we want to emulate him in his practice. So that hadith clarifies, the one in the narration of Sahih Muslim, that it was during Ramadan, and the new moon they were talking about that they saw was Shawwal. The first of Shawwal is called what? Eid al-Fitri. Good. Eid al-Fitri. All right. Number 13. 3 types of deeds were mentioned in Hadith 537. What are those deeds considered according to Islam's teachings, and what does that imply about them? There were 3 types of deeds mentioned in Hadith 537. We gave a hint here. Think about what a person should be fasting from at all times. What were the 3 deeds?
The first one was if a person does not forsake saying what is false,
Saying what is false.
and the second is doing what is prohibited,
Doing what's prohibited.
and the third is behaving in an insolent
Behaving in an insolent manner. Good. Those were the 3 things. So, what are those things considered in Islam? Sins. Good. What does that imply about them?
You don't stop it, don't fast.
Well, kind of, maybe. That's a plausible understanding.
It decreases the reward of your fast.
It decreases the reward of fasting. Good. But the hint, the answer, what we're looking for here is what we said hint, think about what a person should be fasting from at all times. What does that imply about these deeds?
Since food is generally permissible, but those sins are like always impermissible.
Right. The food that you refrain from in Ramadan, under normal circumstances, permissible to eat it. These things, though, these are not things you refrain from while you're fasting only. These things you're supposed to refrain from them always, 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 right? Without exception. This was the idea here. That's what it implies about them, because they are sins. Eating is not a sin, generally. Eating in the daytime of Ramadan, that is a sin. But otherwise, it wouldn't be. So these things here are sins. You avoid these always. Number 14, does doing any of the three aforementioned things nullify a person's fast? Does it nullify your fast if you do any of those things? No. We said it does not nullify. This is the understanding most of the scholars have. It doesn't nullify. Your fast is still valid, but you've committed some serious sins, and these things detract from the reward of your fast. But when they say it doesn't nullify, the basic idea is even if you do those things, it means that you don't have to make up that day at some other point. This is the idea here. This is one of the things we understand. Even if you do those things, you ask Allah for forgiveness. You make tawbah to Allah, but you don't have to make up that day of fasting. Number 15, what basic meaning was presented for 537, that hadith, and what rationale was given? I think that was mentioned already. One of the brothers pointed that out over here. The thing we said here was in footnote, that's in footnote number 2 on page 8, right? That's what the brother mentioned just now. The rationale they mentioned is fasting requires a person to forsake certain things that are permissible under normal circumstances, in addition to forsaking the things that are prohibited under all circumstances. So that's what the brother mentioned just now. Number 16, based on the explanation given for 538, when should the forms of intimacy mentioned be avoided? At the back.
If someone can't control themselves while they're fasting, then it should be avoided until they open their fast.
Okay. Can't control only then? We use the term here in the note. We said here, if you look close to the bottom of page 8, we said that in the third line of that footnote, footnote number 3, if either of the spouses lacks that control, which is what you mentioned, and there is a reasonable possibility. Everybody knows their own situation. You have to know what's reasonable in your situation and circumstances. People are different, right? So if there's a reasonable possibility based on what you know, then avoid, right? This is the idea here. This is the conclusion of the review for our second session. We'll pause here for a little bit, and those who still needed to get their refreshments or finish off the refreshments they started and I interrupted them, they can do so. We'll break, I guess, for about 10 minutes, inshallah, and then we'll continue with our next session. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.